We're welcoming everybody on, and we want you all to share, please. Everybody who's viewing tonight, as the numbers climb and climb and climb, please share as you join us. And let all your sphere of influence know that we're online tonight for a discussion that we hope will provide illumination for a way forward in this current climate that we're seeing, where there's pain, there's difficulty, there's struggle, especially in the context of course, some of our topics tonight, the connection between race, racism, religion, and of course, recovery we want to talk about. So just before we begin tonight, I'd like to ask all my guests to introduce themselves, tell us just in 30 to 45 seconds a little bit about yourselves. I'll ask David on my screen, you're right next to me, so I'll ask you to go first. God bless you.
Well, thanks for having me on again, Pastor Mike. It's a pleasure and good to be on with Selena and good to be on with Stacey and Bishop. So thank you very much. My name is David Sasania. Up until about 2 years ago, I was looking after around about 315, 320 churches in London. Did that for 15 years and worked across different networks. In the last 2 years, I set up a consultancy and I've been working with senior management teams and corporate organizations in health agencies, in statutory agencies, in churches to deliver training and to do consultancy and work with a number of key Christian agencies as clients. So it's a pleasure to be on board and to be sharing a few thoughts with you tonight.
Thank you so much, David. Great to have you here as always. I know you've been on a few of our lives and it's just been so insightful, revelatory, the information that you share with our viewers and with the whole group of us gathering together tonight. Next, we'll go to Bishop. God bless you, Bishop, just because you're next to David on the screen.
God bless you, Pastor Mike, and God bless you, my fellow guests. I'm Bishop Wayne Malcolm, the senior leader at ICANN Community Church in East London, and also the founder of the iGlobal Network, which is an international community of Christian entrepreneurs, professionals, and influencers, and creatives who are very serious about personal development, their impact on society, and their generational legacy. And so we provide personal development for people of faith and faith-based success education. Praise God.
Thank you, Bishop. Love you. You are known across the Christian world, not just in the UK, and we know that you bring great wisdom tonight at Goliath when it comes to the understanding of the fusion between faith and business, enterprise, and entrepreneurialism. So thank you for being present tonight. And of course, we have, Selena Stone. Come on, Selena, tell us about yourself.
Thanks, Pastor Mike. It was really good to be on the panel again. I am a theologian. My interests are in politics and social justice particularly. Before I started lecturing in theology, I was a community organizer, which was about building grassroots movements in politics, particularly in Brixton and in London where I lived. So I'm now back in Birmingham now, but lecturing in London, speaking, writing, getting up to mischief, all for the sake of the kingdom of God, really.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Selena. Great to have your theological acumen. And you left out the part, I think, about political theology and liberation theology in terms of your particular discipline. So thank you for bringing that tonight. And of course, we have the wonderful Stacey Gattry, who's very familiar to our church, not because she's a member, but because, well, an honorary member, I should say. But everything psychology, everything well-being, everything psychotherapy, everybody always asks for Stacey because of her expertise and not just her relevance, but her relativity in being able to communicate these things in language and terms that we can all digest. As much as she's erudite, she's going to make sure that we all understand everything she says tonight. So Stacey, just introduce yourself one more time. Thank you.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Pastor, for having me on tonight. It's such a pleasure. My background's in counseling and I'm a psychological wellbeing practitioner. I'm also the founder of an organization called Renew Today, where I provide affordable and accessible sessions and therapy for people of BAME community. I've got over 10 years clinical experience working for some of Europe's largest organizations, supporting those with mental health and acute mental illnesses. That's a bit about me. I'm a believer and I'm a proud Black woman.
Wonderful. Well, I guess we could all begin on the same footing, knowing that we all agree at least on some things. We all agree, number one, I know because we're all Christ followers, that Jesus Christ is Lord. Can we act like we're in church and get an amen?
Amen.
and I know we're all on the same page in terms of knowing that there's current it seems like the scab, if I could describe it as that, of racism has been picked again. We're all of the same ethnic community, and so by virtue of that, we probably feel the pain in at least similar ways by virtue of our connection relating to the ethnic community that we're a part of, the Black community. But also we're all looking for recovery. I think, you know, all of us on this screen tonight have been involved in a plethora. I've been all over the world, as it were, without leaving my house, in terms of Facebook Lives, Zooms, interviews, being a guest on, not just hosting, which I do on my thing on Wednesday Night Live, but being a guest. And I think we're all probably agreeing here that we've had a lot of conversations about race issues, but there's not been a lot of conversation about recovery. What do we do after this? So I think we're all on the same page when it comes to wanting to see conversations and plans for moving forward as well. Can I get an amen on that as well?
Amen.
So tonight we want to begin, of course, talking about the first primary topic. And to be quite frank, all three topics really, or there's two topics linked by the middle topic. It's racism, religion, specifically Christian faith, church, and of course, recovery. And it's interesting how we've positioned, and it's intentional really, how we've positioned the word religion, dealing with Christianity and the Christian faith primarily, in between these two other ends, racism and recovery. Because I think connected to recovery will be faith. I think faith is a critical part of seeing the recovery happen. And racism, I think, again, faith. From right the way back into the United States and the civil rights movement, faith was always at the forefront and the vanguard of civil rights. As a matter of fact, most of you, of course, know, and some of our viewers might know, some of them don't, that, of course, Black Lives Matter movement, whatever we think about them politically at the moment, but the fact is that they are probably the first and the most powerful or potent or momentum gathering movement to have happened outside of the Christian church. Before that, every other major civil rights drive move historically has really been pioneered or at least fueled and forward pushed by the church. And this is the first time we're seeing it happening outside of the church. But I think personally, I think that for it to really keep momentum, there's going to have to be a connection with faith and the Christian church. So I want to open up by starting with the issue of racism and faith. So last time we had a few other guests on, and we talked about some of the things that seems to be happening within the church in terms of another exposure of racism, especially as it relates to many of the white Christian leaders. And we want to be frank and open tonight. We want to have healthy, honest conversation, not just to be, not just to try and cause problems or cause factions, but just to talk about what everybody's talking about. And yet again, we've now had another week where white Christian leaders talked about it last time. We want to talk about it this week because there's new information, new things coming out with people like Rod Parsley, people like Lou Giglio. I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name, so forgive me if I got that wrong. But in terms of them having made statements, them having tried to put their voice to what's currently going on in America, we've had things also happen over here. Of course, we talked about the Hillsong thing and the Gary Clark thing and all of the things that emanated from that. Here's the first question I want to ask you guys, and I'd like you all just give your personal, it's not necessarily an academic response we're looking for, although you might want to involve that, but it's more your personal response as Black people. 2 Black men, 2 Black women, and Christians as well. How have you interpreted the seemingly errors? Some call it errors, some call it slip of the tongues, when these individuals have made statements, tried to make statements concerning the current racial tensions, and the statements seemingly have not been well thought through, or is it that they've not been, it's not that they've not been well thought through, it's simply a Freudian slip. They are leaking what's really in their heart, because we've got seemingly two interpretations of what's being said at the moment. We've got those people who are saying, yep, these guys are truly, they're revealing their true colors. They can't really help themselves because their real white privilege, white bias, racism is leaking out even in their own statements, and then they're having to come back around now and make apologies? Or is it simply mistakes, slip of the tongues, and they should have said something slightly different? I'll let you go first, Stacey.
I definitely think that, you know, a lot of these pastors and leaders are basically just bleeding out during this stage. They can't help it. They've been swimming in this for so many years that there is going to be residues, and it's going to come. We can't even say slip of the tongue, because it's just their subconscious is there, you know, and it's just going to come out. Whether they like it or not, really. And obviously they haven't consulted with their Black community on a lot of stuff, which they should have, but then it just reflects and just shows that there's probably a lack of Black leaders within their community that could have checked them and just told them, no, that this is not correct, this is not right, it doesn't sound right, and this shouldn't be said, this is how it should have been said. So they're definitely bleeding out right now.
Thank you, Stacey. Bishop, you go, please.
Yeah, well, I think it's possible to achieve racist outcomes without stating racist intent. All right, so or without planning to do so. I think many of these pastors, not all of them, I don't want to put them all in the same boat, but I think that they have failed to demonstrate the concern and care for their Black members, but have benefited financially and in every other way from the presence of Black members. And so without realizing it, perhaps they have achieved racist outcomes without stating or even being intentional about racism. So I think it's just the duty of a pastor to look diligently into the state of your flock. And if you have a Black majority or a significant Black constituents, if you really care about them, you should take the time to figure out what their concerns are, what their needs are, and become acquainted with that, not just to make a statement in light of the current situation,
right,
but to genuinely care about the needs of their congregants. And so what I think, unfortunately, is that many have been exposed, right? So they're just really exposed as utilizing Black dollars, Black pounds, Black congregants without really looking into their needs. And so they've been weighed in the balance and found wanting. I'm not sure how intentional that is, but the outcome is the same. They are having to now apologize because they've demonstrated publicly a lack of sensitivity to the African experience.
Thank you, Bishop. We'll go for, of course, Selena. Go ahead.
I think I spoke last week about how I think so many of these incidents are a failure of pastoral care and a lack of due diligence. I think I'd also add that I think my reflections, having watched the Louis Giglio situation with Lecrae, have been that the church has so many gifts and doesn't utilize them. So my first thought was, how many scholars are there who could eloquently discuss issues around race, whiteness, power, and inequalities? But we lean on our kind of Christian celebrities so much for everything. We have a kind of the cult of the pastor who has to be an expert in all things and know everything about everything. And so they feel the pressure to have to make big pronouncements about issues that they haven't been trained to talk about. And of course they should know about these issues and be able to lead their flock. But it also kind of struck me that there's a kind of sense of, in our churches as a body of people, are we receiving all the gifts that the church has? Are we letting our teachers teach at this time? Are we drawing on people who know about these subjects to bring their gifts to the fore, rather than expecting the leader of a church or of a movement to be the teacher, evangelist, pastor, and everything else? So it did make me think about, how do we make room for those experts in the church who could have dealt with these questions more sensitively?
So it sounds like you're suggesting that it was a slip then. It's simply because of their lack of expertise rather than a revelation of their heart, as Bishop inferred.
I mean, I think that there were definitely issues about white supremacy that, again, as Stacey said, they're born into a world of feeling that there's a superiority about their culture. So I don't want to undermine that. But I think I'm just trying to add a different angle to it, that I think there is a question about there are different gifts that bring different things to the body. And as a pastor, he definitely should understand the weight of what he's saying for his Black congregation. But I think having the space to draw on other gifts is really crucial. And for them to know their limits, to say, I can't talk well about this. Is there somebody else who could more eloquently discuss it?
Thank you so much. David, we've just heard Bishop talk really from the angle of the fact that he believes it's a revelation of the heart, really revealing the fact that they saw their congregants often as let me just call it people on seats, bums on seats, if you want to call it that, congregants paying into their systems, their organizations. Selena's come from the angle of the fact that really and truly it's an exposure of the fact that there is a cult of the pastor. What would you bring to you from your perspective in terms of what you're seeing happening and the words? I mean, it just seems to be week after week since this whole thing's kicked off. Well, when I say week after week, the pastors who are now seemingly speaking out, they're just making lots and lots of errors in terms of how they're communicating what their thoughts are. Dave, talk to us about that.
Well, I think the first thing that strikes me is what Bishop said. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And I think that's a good principle, but I will go from what I know. And I will be eternally grateful for Miss Amy Cooper, who let us know that any rhetoric about accidental leakage is actually a denial of what many white individuals, Christians or not, know to be true about themselves. I said it in the last session. She showed us that while they plead the Fifth Amendment in public, they have a complex, nuanced understanding of racism, and it's deployed and weaponized to have an adverse effect on Black people. That's what I know. So I'm not speculating here now. I absolutely know that because she's told me that. She showed me that. And I've seen that pattern to be consistent with white individuals that I know. Now, I've been doing a series of posts on Facebook just reflecting on this. And the early church is full of racism. And my post yesterday was about Peter. Peter was the leader of the church, spirit-filled, speaking in tongues.
Yeah.
Man had more tongues on Pentecost than anybody else in the room. He was mission-minded. Peter was on point. Senior church leadership. And then he got to Acts chapter 10, racist.
I love that. I mean, the fact is, the question we have to ask as well, and I think this connects again with probably some intra-racial issues, not just interracial issues, is what would, as much as Selena was talking about, which was a great perspective about the fact that you've got the cult of the pastor, or you think the pastor has everything and be know all, jack of all trades within the body of Christ, have all gifts and always be the spokesperson. But the truth be told, we can't get away from the fact that at the end of the day, it's the senior leader who's going to be the one who's going to be conveying the heart of the church and the true DNA of the church. But why would they need? Here's a question that came up in a discussion I had day before yesterday. Somebody was saying, why would they need to feel that they had to double check everything they said if they are already confident that people want, especially their Black members, will be coming to their churches no matter what they say? I remember last time in our part one, we had Steve Tibbet with us, and Steve was great having him on board and hearing his perspective and his response to all what was going on. But a statement that he made, which was quite fascinating, when we asked him, how comes his church, how comes he thinks, or what does he think has been the contributing factor, at least one of them, to the fact that his church is a 3/4, as he kept telling us, 3/4 majority Black church as a white leader. And he said that it's because he believes that many of those Black people prefer white leadership. So if you've got that going through the mind of Black people in a white-led context, why would the leader feel the necessity to have to be specific or detailed, fastidious, pedantic in analyzing his statement concerning an issue that applies to Black people, if you know they prefer you anyway by virtue of your color? Dave, speak to that, and then we'll go to Bishop.
Well, you see, one of the things I like about the Church of England is that they refer, in your initial stages of formation, they refer to you as a minister as the curer of souls. You cure souls. And actually, one of the things that we haven't taken seriously is the kind of post-traumatic slave syndrome.
Right.
I talked about this last time, the internalized pathology.
Yeah.
And Jesus talked about 99 and the one. And even though white pastors have
We lost you there. You said the 99 and the 1, yeah?
and the one. So even though a white pastor could have predominantly a disproportionate number of Black Christians in their congregation, by virtue of their historical woundedness through the transatlantic slave trade, through epigenetics, the way that genes affect the way people behave, through the microaggressions of racism, through all forms of social exclusion, the Black people represent the one.
Yeah.
And therefore, the pastor should have and place on them a disproportionate sense of importance. In actual fact, this is not just about political philosophy or anything, or social theory. This is in the Bible. The Bible says the weaker parts of the body should be more comely. So if you've got a big church, whoever you are as a white pastor, if you've got a big church and that big church has a disproportionate number of Black people, then actually, no matter how big that number is, they still represent the one that you go out of your way for, to care for, and to pastor because of the historical nature of their woundedness. And I think that is something that needs to be addressed. And if it's not addressed, it's because the internalized superiority that they have in terms of their whiteness means that actually they still see these Black bodies as commodities that they need to transact and they need to exploit and they need to capitalize upon. And I think unless anybody has been deliberate in saying that they've thought through the internalized structures of racism within their own life, pastor or not, speaking in tongues or not, like Peter on the day of Pentecost, you still racist, brother and sister.
Wow. Selena, chime in here.
I mean,
you've been inside of a context like that, haven't you? So you come especially as a millennial, as part of the protest generation, the generation that often is now making up the majority of some of these white-led churches. You're coming with another unique perspective. So if you could feed into that from that perspective, that'd be great.
I mean, I think I can understand why there would be a sense that a person making a choice to go to a white-led church can be problematic. But I think I did try to explain last time that it's not as simple. I don't think people make it, I can't speak for everybody. I'll speak for myself. I haven't made a conscious decision to say I'm looking for a white-led church. I've been to a few different ones, but it was part of my journey of my spirituality developing. It was, I grew up in a Pentecostal church that has a very specific kind of spirituality. I like some silent prayer, some contemplation. I like to listen to the still small voice of the Spirit in church. You can't hear the still small voice of the Spirit and it's a wonderful vibrancy, but there's just a different kind of spirituality. And I think I don't apologize for having had the joy of experiencing the beauty of what we might think of as white spiritualities, because I think they have drawn me to meeting God in very different ways. So I don't want to in any way say that I don't want to have had that experience, because it's been a very positive thing for me. I think for me, it's been important that the leaders are conscious about the life that I'm living and the things that matter to me. And that's not guaranteed that in a Black church I'm going to find that. Because as much as we've talked a lot about white churches' value to engage with these issues, like we have had Black leaders who've been very quiet on these questions. You know, Pentecost Sunday was the first Sunday after George Floyd. I had white friends who rewrote their whole sermons on the basis of what happened. I went to a Black online church that had no mention of George Floyd. So I think we can assume that a Black church is going to get it and a white church isn't. But I think we have to learn to be discerning, that wherever we are, we're discerning. What is the spirit at work in this church or in this congregation? Is there an integration of spirituality with the real life of human beings? Is the leader somebody who can join the dots theologically between the scriptures and what's happening in the world? And I don't think that's tied to race.
So why did you leave the white church?
Because I felt as if I was longing for a deeper connection to the fullness of who I am as a Black woman within my spirituality. I felt like I was missing that sense of being connected with a Black congregation. I was missing seeing leaders who looked like me. I missed cultural norms and references that were true to who I am. And that's what I was missing.
Right. Stacey, it's interesting. Selena mentioned what she was missing. And is that to do with spirituality or really psychology? I mean, I suppose the two are intertwined at the end of the day. But I've noted what Selena was saying, and thank you for that, Selena. It's very insightful and helpful based on your own experience and not just your academic knowledge. But Stacey, talk to us about the importance of that, because Selena was talking about, wanting to experience the different types of spirituality and how she did glean some things from being in a white-led church. But then she was missing some other things that spoke to her cultural or ethnic identity. Tell us about how that would work from a psychological perspective, and then I'll come to Bishop.
Yeah, I definitely think the two are intertwined. Obviously, while she's within her childhood, she would have been socialized to a certain aspect of her identity, growing up in a Pentecostal church. That is part of her foundation and her roots. So a lot of her behaviors and her choices and her belief system is going to stem from that. So as she's growing and as she's now, exploring out into secondary socialization, so your universities, what you're learning in theology, that's a different aspect of your identity. And obviously you've gone there to try and meet a specific need, but recognizing that it's not actually meeting that need once you've gotten there. So I just feel like with psychology, we've all got different needs, isn't it? So we've got a spiritual need and we've got a mental need. And that is the two that Selena is struggling with at the moment, is trying to meet that spiritual need alongside the mental need. Our spiritual needs, that's faith. The currency of that is always going to be faith. However, our mentality is our belief system. And that's slightly different to just a divine understanding of faith. Our belief system is where our mind comes in and how we, understand the world around us. And that would have been created as well.
We're talking about spirit. We're talking about intel. If I could coin a couple of phrases just to kind of give us some understanding as to what we're talking about. To me, it sounds like, and I humbly submit this, it sounds like we're talking about a need for a juxtaposition from that particular millennial group, especially who are in those contexts. And I'm not saying Selena represents all of them, because different people have their different reasons, but it needs to be an amalgamation between spiritual stimulation, intellectual stimulation and spiritual formation in terms of the environment. But the assumption is that can't be, well, let me say this first. Is it possible for you to really get that cultural identity from a white leader, from a white context? I guess the obvious answer to me would be no. But it also seems like we're assuming that you can't get the intellectual stimulation from a Black context either. Bishop, do you want to speak to that?
Yes. So I'm going to throw a few spanners into the spokes. All right. As follows. So first of all, I think that there is a maybe a failure to achieve a universal definition of racism, of the word racism. Right? Because if we're going to communicate with each other, then we have to agree on the meaning of the words and the phrases that we use. So if I think one thing when I use the word racism, and let's say a fellow white pastor thinks of it as something else, then they can very easily deny with deep conviction that there's any racism within them. Right. So I think like for me personally, I draw a distinction between racism and prejudice. OK, so even though they're intertwined, I draw a difference. So there are many people who are not prejudiced. OK, but they sustain racism. OK, and that I feel is the tension that a Black person in a white-led church feels, not prejudice, because everyone's welcoming, like, come on in. It's great to have you. So nice to see you, etc., etc. And but I think of prejudice as fundamentally an educational problem. right? In terms of its root. Prejudice is prejustice. It's me looking at you and deciding that I know who you are, what you like, what you're about, based on a particular feature. And I think we all suffer from a degree of prejudice, right? Because we make these auto assumptions about people based upon meeting them. It is only in meeting them and developing a relationship with them and in experiencing them that we lose those prejudices. Racism, on the other hand, is to do with power, the abuse of power in order to preserve privilege or power. So it becomes more of a political and economic phenomenon. So I can see where a white pastor would argue to the end of the earth from a very deep place that I am not racist, because what he thinks is I'm not prejudiced. Whereas the structure of the actual organization clearly preserves white privilege, honors white leadership, and doesn't truly respect black leadership. Hence, there is this glass ceiling that people experience. So this becomes the tension you navigate, which is everyone seems to love me here, but my prospects are quite limited here. Can't ever see myself in a particular place. And so that's where I think the tension is. And I think that definitions, clarity about what racism actually is perhaps a starting point in overcoming some of that. And just to support Selena somewhat, right, in this, right, I think there's an overemphasis on the optics, all right? When you talk about black, white, right? Some black leaders are absolutely disastrous, okay, at leadership. They are black-skinned, but don't have a clue, all right? And so if I had to choose between sitting under, white leadership that had a clue and black leadership that didn't have a clue, I might struggle. I'm not saying I might struggle, right? I think that the same dynamic translates to business, where this idea of black-owned business, well, okay, what do you mean by that? What is it? Do we need an optical a black-skinned person running the business for us to get behind it and support it? Well, it's going to take more than that for me to financially invest in a business, okay? So as much as my heart and my desire is to see our community empowered, I also want to see standards raised. I also want to do my due diligence. I also want to qualify any claims that are being made and be able to use my gifts, as Selena said, or to support where there is a deficiency, so that our black businesses are robust and sustainable.
But the assumption, I hear what you're saying there, Bishop, and it was phenomenal insight, especially as you dissected for us perfectly the difference between the prejudice and the racist being a system. The assumption, and I've got a question here that came in actually, and I kind of want to throw this into the mix, and you can all have a stab at it. Could I ask the panel why a church with black leadership is less likely to have a large white following? However, a white-led church will have a large black following, okay?
Oh, please.
Let's throw that question in there. But I want to come back to you quickly, Bishop, because the assumption, again, and it's almost kind of connecting a little bit with what Selena was saying, is that you can't find the two, the stimulation and the formation, in a black-led church. You're right. There are some black leaders who are abysmal in terms of their leadership. They were never sent. They haven't been trained. There's no theological acumen. There's nothing going on there. And there are also some white leaders like that. But yet it seems to be that we, especially as black people, and let me use that again. I've used this before, but just without trying to sound repetitive, use the example. It's the same thing in black business, where if my car breaks down as a black man, I take it to a black mechanic. He messes the car up and makes it worse. And then I say, I'm never going to a black mechanic again. And I start going only to white mechanics. And the same things in church. So a black person will have a bad experience in a black church or lack of intellectual stimulation and then decide, well, I'm leaving the black church, period. And there seems to be an intraracial issue going on there. Dave, Bishop, I don't know if you wanted to come back at that, or should we move on to Dave? Bishop,
I feel like I have way too much to say about that question that came in.
Okay, we'll come back to you on the question.
So I best come back to me.
I'm going to come back to you. You'll have first stab at that question. Dave, I want you to feed into what we just said. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to stab at that question as well, because I think it's an interesting question. But let me tell you something. I tell you, we we significantly underestimate the internalized pathology that we carry as Black people. And that pathology increases as each generation increases. The sociological theory of the third generation hypothesis demonstrates the first generation is quite separate. The second generation seeks to aggregate what they brought from home with what is the existing culture, and then the third generation seeks to be completely independent from the completely isolated group and the group that has conflated two cultures and set up a third culture. And if we draw the correlation between the process of spirituality and the process of education, I think what happens is that those two strands, as they intersect, begin to polarize our internal pathology in a way that we haven't yet begun to penetrate and analyze. Because what happens is we have a fundamental need as Black people to be connected to one another, the African concept of Ubuntu, of being a person through other people. But our education and our socialization in Western culture tells us that we're individuals. And so does the education system. And therefore, the more educated we become, the more individualistic we become.
Yeah.
But yet, instinctively and intuitively, as Black people, we're looking for connection, and we're looking for belonging, and we're looking for a sense of interdependency. One guy defined Ubuntu as a complex, intersubjective understanding of oneself. And I like that, because they say we can't understand ourselves on our own.
Yeah.
But everything around us not only tells us that we are individuals, but actually, as Black people, we find that what happens next is that our community is so pathologized that actually we don't even want to align ourselves with that community. Now, let me just say this simple point. Any of us on this platform or anywhere that go into a room and become conscious of our Blackness are already nodding towards an acknowledgement of that internalized pathology.
Right.
I have it. I've got two choices. My choice is either to conclude with it, or my choice is to develop a resistance culture within my own thinking, so that instinctively, when I see that take place, I actually repudiate it out of my life experience. I don't think we've taken that seriously enough. I think there is far more trauma going on in our psyche as African and Caribbean people than we dare to believe. And what happens is that we can explain it away, we can describe it away, analyze it away, but in the end, we're fundamentally confronted with our own internalized polarities around a pride around our Blackness and the shame around the socialization and the education system that makes us internalize a very pathological view of Black people, including ourselves. And until we allow the gospel to really get into that, Jesus is from Nazareth. Jesus is a Galilean. The disciples kept their cultural identity because it created a resistance to the social conditioning of the Roman Empire. They didn't just have a faith perspective, but they had a faith perspective that was layered with their cultural perspective. There was an interface between the two that allowed them to develop a real resistance. And I don't think we've got the courage yet to be able to develop a faith that is fundamentally Black, fundamentally African, and fundamentally Christian. And I think that presents huge problems when we try to live our lives in Western society. But I think it also provides huge problems for, and I'll close with this, it provides huge problems for the third generation. Because I grew up in a culture where there was a whole heap of slackness in reggae music. But we had Dennis Brown. We had Burning Spear. They offered a counter narrative to the stuff that was actually making us feel less than. Dennis Brown talked about, do you know what it's like to have a revolution? All these songs were there to kind of give us an alternative perspective. Fela Kuti in the African tradition offered fantastic counter narratives to what was going on. It strikes me that actually what's happening a lot with third generation hypotheses is that we've lost a degree of being anchored within the African context. And actually, there's been even in the second generation, but second and third generation, there's been a greater aspiration to be embedded in British culture. And actually, as a result, I think we've lost a lot. And I think it has a material effect in how we see ourselves, how we see other people, and how we see Black church.
Wow, there's so much in that. I mean, I want to come to the question. I'm going to come to Bishop as I promised, and I'm trying to be a Christian and fulfill my word. But the fact is, it almost sounds like you're suggesting, Dave. It sounds like you're suggesting, and I know it may sound antithetical to our traditional understanding of Christianity and unity, but there are many people who quote scriptures like we are all one in Christ Jesus. There's neither Jew nor Greek. And of course, we understand that the oneness there is nothing to do with our individual identity. It's to do with really our value in Christ, because, you know, we are not, it also says we're neither male nor female. And does that mean that I've lost my gender? No, certainly not. But the fact is that it's to do with value. But the reason I bring that scripture is because this is usually the scripture people bring up when they hear anything that infers it's all right to be separate. It's all right.
Can I speak to that? Could I speak to that very quickly? And please forgive me. I'll keep my mouth shut.
90 seconds. I've got to come to Bishop.
I'll be brief. I'll be briefer than that.
Today.
I'll be briefer than that. That reading of the text is fundamentally Western, and it's designed to make us feel that we're part of a community that we belong in when we don't. In actual fact, when you read it from Paul's perspective, Paul is saying you are not, he doesn't say these, he's not saying these distinctions don't exist. What he's saying is in Christ, these distinctions are not meant to polarize you.
Right.
Because the cultural conditioning makes the male feel better than the female, makes the Jew feel better than the Gentile. So he says, actually, no. Yeah. In Christ, which the Babel was the destruction of language, in Pentecost, God in Christ and through the Holy Spirit brings us back and reverses Babel. And Paul says actually a reversal of Babel means that your cultural conditioning doesn't have preeminence over the gospel of Jesus Christ. So these superficial distinctions should not separate you. And if you don't allow Christ to be Lord in your life, they will. So if you're white and you don't allow Christ to be Lord, you'll be racist. If you're a man, you don't allow Christ to be Lord, you'll be misogynistic. We read it from the other way around. The way that we read it is often a Western way of reading the text, and I don't buy it.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Quiet now for a while.
No, no problem. I'm going to go to Bishop, then we're going to come to Selena, then Stacey. Go ahead, Bishop.
Well, first of all, I could listen to all of you like for
Bishop,
a very long time.
Before you say anything, I need it. Sorry, Bishop, I apologize. Can everybody, if you're being blessed by this, let's see 100 fire emojis. Just let us know. Give us some feedback if the discussion's healthy and helpful and open and you're being blessed by it already. And share, let everybody in your sphere of influence know they can record the football and come and join in the conversation. Go ahead, Bishop.
Well, this is just remarkable. I could listen to all of you for a very long time, and I feel like I'm learning tonight, and no doubt we're all learning. So do send up those fire emojis. Now, the question was to do with why it is that we don't see white majorities in Black-led churches, right? And in some cases, why we don't even see white minorities in Black-led churches. Actually, this is a contention that as a Black pastor, I have worked with over many years and spoken to other Black pastors. And what we've done typically is we've bent ourselves out of all proportion in order to make ourselves, and this has meant, changing the beat, changing the after church food, uniforming people on the platform to not be so cultural, and then utilizing the members we have of a different hue in very frontline positions. And we've done all of these things to try to attract, but it just hasn't happened. So in any significant way. So the problems we were addressing in the last conversation about, the white-led Black majority church, we don't have an equivalent of that in the Black-led church within a Black-led structure. So of course you could, in an established church that is white-led, have the appointee of a Black vicar or a Black so on, and the majority of the congregation would be white. However, that's within the context of white leadership. Now, So I'm going to be brutal with this piece, with your permission, and I feel like I have. I feel like I have it. I feel like I have it. Yeah, yeah. So I think the reason for this is sin. Okay, sin. I think that there is an original sin inside the inside British society that people are quite conscious of, unwilling to talk about, unwilling to address, but it is a sin. And the sin I'm referring to is the whitewashing of history. Okay, the whitewashing of history. So what we do once a year, 1 month out of a year, is we have a Black History Month. And in that Black History Month, we highlight the achievements of Black individuals. And that's meant to compensate for the whole-scale miseducation that that omitted Black heroes from the main curriculum.
Yeah.
And I guess at one stage in my life, I thought, okay, well, this is good. This is a good thing to do. Let's go ahead and do that. But I don't think that is the problem. I think the fundamental problem is the failure of our educational institutions in the United Kingdom to teach British history. The truth about British history. I think that if British history were taught, good, bad, and ugly, we would have some different outcomes. Right. Slavery is a part of British history, and it's an integral part of British history. It is a crime that it was not taught to me in school, that this engine of the empire, this economic engine that absolutely built the empire, was mysteriously missing from the curriculum. This could not have been accidental. It had to be fully intentional, not only to hide the truth of Britain's empire and the truth of Britain's wealth from Black immigrants who had come in the country, but to hide it from white people. So it is white people who don't know the truth about British history. Hence, they walking past these statues and saying, here's a great hero, here's a great philanthropist who built this city. And they're just now finding out that this great philanthropist had all of this money because he traded Africans and he traded in slavery. So the truth of British history, when you don't teach your own people the truth about their history, you become complicit in the crime. You become an accessory to the crime. You are now part of the crime because you're covering up the crime. My belief is that if the system taught the truth about British history, what would happen is the Brit would see the Black man quite differently. Instead of someone that you are supposed to look down on because of their social economic condition, you would actually admire him. You would actually say, wow, these are the people that survived all of the brutality that our empires threw at them. These are the descendants of the people that we robbed, that we raped, that we pillaged, that we plundered. These have survived and they deserve our respect. They have to be brilliant geniuses with very strong genes and very strong minds to have even survived and gone on to become what they have become. So I think that there is a sin underlying all of this, and it is the whitewashing of history. And what it's led to is a superiority complex that they've inherited, and the inferiority complex that we've inherited, so that we find it quite easy to sit under white leadership, and whites find it very difficult to sit under Black leadership. And this issue of leadership, to me, is much more important than prejudices, because prejudices are overcome by relationship. Like, if you meet me, you're going to love me. It's as simple as that. If you meet me, you're going to like me. I mean, I'm not a gambling man, but I'm here to tell you that you cannot spend much time with me and fail to like me. Okay. So long as your experience of Black people is governed by the media representations, which typically are negative representations. We've got like millennial scholars, academics.
not just individuals.
And of the black church, never seen anything. You know, I stopped watching EastEnders, right? All right. I stopped when they ran a series about a black preacher, a black minister who happened to be a pedophile and a murderer and was murdering people and putting them in. I said, you know what? I'm never going to watch this again. Like, I'm completely out of it. So these representations, if you've never met a black person, you're getting your idea of what blackness is. We're not seeing our professionals profile. We're not seeing our academics profile. We're not seeing our entrepreneurs profile. So the white population, their prejudice is understandable and will be overcome, but their disrespect of black leadership, this feeling that black leadership is inferior, so that if we get involved with you, we will get involved in as much as we can control you, as much as we can be in charge. We want a seat on the board and we want a governing position. And the failure to invest in our projects unless they are in some way managing it, I think all of this is the byproduct of miseducation, which is the original sin.
Stacey and then Selena.
No, I definitely agree with everything that Bishop has just said. And obviously David touched on how much we've actually internalized decades of like racial oppression and all the effects that it's had on our identity. And, you know, one of the things that we've embraced is around us being subhuman, or we're inferior, we're incapable, we're a burden. This is all that we're seeing as imagery of us, and we've embraced that. But then don't forget that the white community has also been fed that same narrative. So if we're saying that, you know, it's not okay, or it's okay for us to sit underneath white leadership because that's all we've ever seen, having a white Jesus or having white leaders, that means power and leadership skills is only attributed to the white community. But then our white counterparts are going to have the same mentality and belief system as well, because they're being being fed the same narrative.
Well, before we go to Selena, I want to say something on that point and Bishop's point. It's reminded me of a conversation I had a couple of weeks ago with a very, very good friend of mine. He's an academic. He's a black professional entrepreneur, very successful, and Christian as well. And he was talking, and we had a really good heart-to-heart about this. And he made a statement that he knows would not be welcomed if he said it in public. So I won't say his name, just in case anybody here knows him. But I must admit, I kind of concur with much of what he was saying. And I want to tie what he said in with a question that's coming as well, because he was saying that as a black man, he said, as a black man raising a black family, 2 black boys and a black little girl, in the UK, he said that with all this imagery, I'm listening to what Bishop has said about how our psychology has been fed as a people. These are all intraracial issues. Stacey, you've just fed in as well on the same point, similar point. He said that he would not be attending. He said he's got lots of black friends. Many of his in-laws lots of white friends. Many of his in-laws are white. He's got many. He said he's got many mentors who are white. Many people he looks up to are white. But he said week in, week out, as a black man, he would not any longer attend a church with white leadership, not because he's against white leadership technically, but because he knows what it's doing to the psychology of his kids. In terms of the black church is the only place he's realized, the black-led church is the only place, and this is something that I actually shared with him, and he used it in the same context, is the only place where in the UK, at least in the UK, America's a little bit different because America has HBUs, higher black universities. They've got the NAACP. They've got all these different organizations and caucuses that are black-led with a black mass group. But the black-led church in the UK is the only real institution with momentum, with clear structure. It's not perfect. We know it's not perfect. There's nothing that's perfect. But it's the only thing with clear black leadership in a mass group who have the potential for momentum, and also where the imagery of a black leader on stage every week is going to be sowing something into his kids' minds. He said that he's had people argue before saying, well, they should get their he's usually his white friends that he's had little conversations with about this. They should get their leadership understanding from the fact that black leadership can happen from the home. But he said he realized it was more than the home in terms of what was needed for imagery, the psychology of imagery. Otherwise, you're just constantly reinforcing the miseducation that Bishop spoke about that gives the inferiority complex, and what Stacey was talking about as well, as in terms of the importance of imagery and black leadership. And I want to connect that, and I'll start with you, Selena. I want to connect that to this question. Somebody's asked, do you think there is any place or necessity for multicultural churches, or should ethnic groups worship separate? And that kind of, again, connects with what I was asking David earlier about, is there a problem? Why do we have this assumption that God is, I believe God is against division, but is he, is being separate a big deal? So long as there's equilibrium and we're not divided in terms of having issues with each other. I'll start with Selena, then we'll go back to David, and then we'll go to Bishop. Go ahead, Selena.
I think this is a really important question, and something that I am constantly debating with different friends about who have different perspectives. And I love what you're saying, Pastor Mike, about children and role models, because I often think, I don't know I'd be who I am if I'd grown up in a white church. Yeah. I don't know if I would have had the confidence and affirmation growing up if I had grown up in a white church. Even though my family were amazing, I needed to see Black women leading things, and Black families and Black men leading things, because I think in university, my professional life, I've been surrounded by whiteness all the time. And I do think that's really important. I think if I had kids to raise, I'd be raising them in a Black church, to be completely honest, because I think, as you say, there isn't another space where they're going to see that. And I know how important that's been for my own sense of calling and leadership development in Black churches. Black churches are amazing at this stuff, developing young leaders. They're incredible. And I think that we can't miss out on that in the generations to come. In terms of the multicultural question, I'm not really sure how that will be possible. I think I'm at the point where I think a Black leader could lead a multicultural church. I'm not sure a white leader could. And I say that because my question, this is similar to what Bishop Malcolm was saying, has been, if integration and inclusion and diversity is so important, which is what we're hearing so much, why are white people not going to Black churches? That's my, like, why is it always a case of Black people have been asked to leave their communities or to stay in white majority contexts, where you can have one or two people in positions of power, but the vast majority of power holders are still white? If inclusion is really the agenda, if integration and diversity is really the agenda, then where is the attempt to build power together from the beginning? I think a lot of white churches are discovering now that I think they're even paying lip service to this question of inclusion. I've seen it in church planting, real confusion about why Black people are not coming to white churches. And I think, well, why would Black people come to a church that has nothing to do with their culture when it's literally purely white and there's nothing about it that's multicultural? And I think there's a sense, and we've touched on it already, that white people don't recognize their culture as a culture. They just see it as normative. So I have a culture, you have a culture, an Asian person has a culture, but whiteness is just seen as this normative, neutral thing that everybody should just be able to get on board with. And I think not being able to interrogate what whiteness is and how it functions as a dominating force in a church space is one of the reasons why multiculturalism, I think, is almost impossible under white leadership.
Wow. Go ahead, David. Thank you so much, Lena.
Boy,
Maybe open with
no. The thing is, no. We're not talking about. One of the things we do as Black people is we assume responsibility for things that we have that responsibility for. So, if Jimmy Savile was Black, all of us would have flown back to Nigeria and Jamaica and Ghana because we would have assumed responsibility for it. Yeah. But the white people just carried on their business as if one individual acted unilaterally according to his own perversive instincts. But with us, we assume responsibility. And we do that in church. Multicultural church is not just possible, it's desirable. But white people won't come. And that's not our responsibility to make them come, unless you want to go on a conquest or on a crusade to compel them to come in. So the issue of lack of multicultural church is not the concern of the Black constituency. It's not the concern of Black Christians. And I say that not the concern in that we're not interested in it, but white people won't come and sit under black leadership. And I said it 2 weeks ago, the assumption of superiority, we're better than you. The assumption of inferiority, you couldn't possibly lead us. And the assumption of incompetency, though you got the degrees, I'm sure you can't do it the way that we do it. That triangulation of thoughts doesn't allow white leaders to come and sit under black leaders. And the last thing is this. In the book of Acts, because I've been reading Acts a lot lately, trying to get a biblical perspective before I start getting, anyway. So I know I've been reading Acts, and it's this. In Acts chapter 6, if in order for the church to become multicultural, Jews had to give power up to the Greek Jews. They handed over the leadership of the church in terms of the administration of the church, and the apostles done what they needed to do. But in terms of the day-to-day management of the church, it was handed over to the Greek Jews from the Hebraic Jews.
Yeah.
But what's interesting, Peter himself, who was presiding over it, was still himself, whatever you want to call it, racist, prejudice. He still had a heart that was othering people that he should have been bringing into himself, until he finally got to Acts chapter 10, when he began to, it took a revelation from God. And I think we like to read these scriptures as if they're nothing. But here's a man who was there on the day of Pentecost. He lived and walked with Jesus. And what we discover about him at the end of it is that he has a heart that doesn't embrace other people.
Yeah.
Let's not underestimate the strength of racism. And let's not underestimate the strength of prejudice. And there's a lady called Barbara Trepanier. She said, I don't ask white people whether they think they're racist or not. If you ask a rapist, you think he's a rapist. You think he's going to say he's a rapist. You just say he had a desire and he misheard what he heard. But we know he's a rapist. I don't care if you're a white person, you say you're racist or you're not racist. I don't ask you that question. I ask you, how racist are you? Because you can't grow up in the Western culture that is built on all these kind of pseudo-science theories about black people, that's buttressed by sociological theories, that's reinforced by an educational system, and then it plays itself out in employment. And then I want to ask you how racist you are. It's like asking somebody, you know what, did you go swimming? Yeah, I went swimming. Well, did you stay dry? Yeah, man, I was dry as I came to... No, you weren't. If you live in the West and you're socialized in the West, you're racist. You're either more racist or less racist.
So we've got
I think sometimes we assume responsibility for stuff we don't need to.
So, Dave, we've got two issues then, intra-racial issues. And this is now feeding a little bit into our recovery, because we're identifying areas that we need to really deal with for us to recover. We've got the intra-racial issue of, you talked about the fact that you're sensing that we have this sense of assumed responsibility. So we think that we're always the one to have to change, to have to accommodate, to have to bring people in. And there's the other issue of the black people who are saying, according to like what Steve Tibbet was saying, they say they prefer, or they at least have some kind of notion that they prefer white leadership, which Bishop was saying is as a result of a inferiority complex. So we've got an assumed responsibility that we have to deal with to recover. We've got a inferiority complex that we need to deal with in order for us to really recover. Bishop, talk some more about it.
Yeah. So I don't think that white leaders in the church context are ignorant of this issue. I think this is known, discussed, and fully accepted by them. I don't think that they're, that this is an epiphany. It may be an epiphany that we are now openly discussing it, but they know that they possess a superiority complex, and that the population is never encouraged to attend a black-led church, even a British black, right? So there's no obvious foreign culture involved. There's good English, there's qualification. They simply will not come and sit under your leadership in any significant numbers. They know this, and this is why I call it a sin. I do not believe that revival comes to Britain until multicultural churches exist with black leadership, white leadership, Asian leadership, I don't believe you're free from racism until you can, on the quality of what you feel, what you're experiencing in the spirit, your spiritual growth, literally bring your family and attend a Black-led church. I think that the talk about integration is a complete farce. And I think we should call them out on, you are not interested in integration. You are harboring the original sin. You are complicit with slavery. You're an accessory to the whitewashed version of history that has been taught in schools. You are supporting the notion of Black inferiority by simply not, treating us as equals. What is equality other than you're choosing your church without race being an issue? Like, we're not equals if my color is an issue to you. And this is an obvious national scenario that they know about 100%.
So we're going to come to Stacey next. Just before Stacey jumps in, because we want to start moving into the Black space. Well, I mean, anecdotally, I've spoken to, I've had, we had a TV, we have got a TV relationship, Christian TV. We get people, of course, the reach of that is to millions of people. We have people visiting our church who have seen us on television and have wanted to visit. When they've come, we've had conversations with them, and they've told us that they came and they felt a little bit nervous because they didn't expect so many Black people. So they've seen us on TV preaching, they've drawn to the ministry, but when they've come, seeing so many Black people around has oftentimes intimidated them. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I absolutely love my white members, the white members that we do have, who come, who stay, who introduce me to their family as their pastor. I mean, they're in the vast minority, but I love them to pieces because they are choosing to be anti-racist and choosing to be against the norms, and so we respect that greatly. But I want to move forward a little bit and talk about, in terms of recovery. We're kind of segueing here concerning recovery. We're talking about the Black church, talking about the Black-led church. Stacey, I want you to pick up on that and talk about how that can be a key part of our recovery, especially if we're talking about imagery and if we're talking about the importance of seeing Black leadership. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm just going to touch quickly on what you just said about your churches. I think us as Black people, we constantly have to navigate white spaces, whether that's in work, whether that's in education, in different areas of society. But white people don't have to navigate Black spaces. So that's why they become so uncomfortable, why it's really unfamiliar. They don't like it. They don't understand it because they don't have to be forced into it the way that we are. So it's really nice to hear that you've got white people within your churches that are really anti-racist and obviously becoming advocates for a Black space. But yeah,
for me, by virtue of them being there, I mean, as I said, they're the vast minority. I love all our amazing, beautiful members who come from non-Black backgrounds, love them to pieces, but their very presence, I'm not even sure if they realize how powerful their very presence in a Black majority space with a Black leader who's unapologetically Black. We're one of the only churches I know who really teaches on Black theology, Black liberation. During Black History Month, you'll see us being extremely public with this stuff, and they are there and they are digesting it, and it's just powerful, their presence. But sorry to interrupt. Their presence is powerful,
Yeah, I just think, Black churches are really just vital for growth and just re-educating and creating a lot of safe spaces. And as Bishop keeps on saying, like, we have to be able to relearn and obviously unlearn a lot of stuff that we've been socialized with. And when it comes to, obviously, with churches raises our own consciousness. It raises a level of consciousness around racism as well, and it helps us to kind of reclaim our whole identity, a whole racial identity, because at the moment it's distorted. Yes. Our racial self-image has been distorted by the society that we live in. So, I think, as we said, what's coming from the pulpit it's going to manifest within the congregation. So we're having Black leaders, we're talking about equality, we're talking about Black excellence, we're talking about Black power. We're re-educating our congregation as well. So just having that, the church as a Black safe space is really kind of important. And I just think it's important to understand that racism is trauma in itself.
Yeah.
And with trauma, that really vandalizes our self-worth, our self-value, and just how the outlook that we have on life, and it really kind of disempowers us. So church as a Black space is very empowering for us. So the church then acts as a buffer to a lot of these, racial stereotypical views that people would have, or that society are trying to tell us that we have. So, I just think the Black space will definitely act as a buffer to all of that.
Yeah. I want to dedicate the rest of this conversation just to recovery. Everybody's talking about what can we do now. The recovery, by the way, is from, number one, the trauma that we've experienced recently, having seen the murder of Mr. George Floyd and all of the things that are the pain and the anger that's erupted from that. Also, the recovery of us from our intraracial problems. Intraracial problems include our negative mindset concerning economy, our negative mindset concerning politics, our colorisms, all these things. I think it's religion or Christ or the church, let me do with the church, is going to be a critical part of leading the recovery. I want to start talking about what are the top things we can do in terms of recovery, education, politics. Selena, you begin.
I mean, I firstly want to say that I think recovery can come from lots of different places.
Yeah.
And although we are talking about the church, we have to also recognize that in our community's history, it's often not been people in church who've led liberation movements. There's often had to be a collection of people, Black people from all different spaces. I think the important thing for us politically is going to be to grow past our sectarian way of thinking as Black people. I think it's going to be partly about us gathering around our common African heritage. It's going to be about being willing to work across church denominations. It's going to be about us being willing to build relationships with Black Muslims and Black people of other traditions and faiths, because I think we allow ourselves to be divided down so much that our political power is dispersed. And we're going to have to gather around across barriers and work together on issues of shared concern. And I think also it has to be a political movement that isn't just led by middle-class Black people, because this is one of the things I've been thinking about a lot, is that we as generally middle-class Black people talk about racial inequality, we're thinking about the microaggressions that we might experience in our jobs or in our church spaces. And that's the light end of what racial inequality looks like in Britain. We have 1 in 5 Black children growing up in poverty in our country, when there's only 1 in 10 white children. We have our children at every level of education really failing to perform to the most of their potential. We have issues with getting into jobs once universities end. So there are quite critical junctures in our life that we need to be taking quite seriously when it comes to thinking about what does mission look like for the Black church? How do we build political power around these concerns? And how do we relate to those who are outside of our church walls, who have shared interests with us?
Bishop, I'm going to come to you. Recovery, your recovery plan in terms of economy, because education and economy is especially what I want you to talk about, because of course your real notoriety comes through your amalgamation of the business and entrepreneurial world with the faith world. What can we do? Because as I said, again, I think the church, and Selena talked about reassessing our understanding of mission. If we're going to drive this forward, what can we do from an education perspective and also from an economy perspective? People are talking about, the current talk at the moment, social media talk is about the Black pound and all this kind of stuff. Talk to us about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, okay. Well, first of all, I believe that success leaves clues, all right? And that if you want to achieve any level of success, you start by modeling the psychology and the strategies of those who have achieved what you want. That's kind of universal doctrine within the personal development and success self-help world. Where this applies to us is that I think a lot of money has been spent portraying or describing, defining Black culture as ghetto culture. All right. So basically, we get seen.
So we're identifying Black culture as ghetto culture.
Yes, yes, and so here's, and I think a lot of money has been spent on that. So if you look at some of the turns that were made in hip hop, which originally started as storytelling and almost a form of journalism where people told their truth and their story, this began to swerve in another direction. And this was funded very much by, again, racist structures who were ready to put money into depicting Black people a particular way, so that the wider society, who don't have actual relationships with Black people, think of Black people in a particular way. Hence the, I'm holding my handbag, there's a Black person coming, keep your bag. Where did you get that from? You've gotten that from a narrative that is well funded. All right. But the negative effect that that's had on us is that people who deviate from that script are then accused of not being Black. Right. So Black is now defined as your allegiance to the ghetto, to the culture of the ghetto. I think it's very important that we actively counter the narrative. Now, as much as I love the hood, I pastor in the hood, you know, and all of that. The point is, we do have doctors, we do have lawyers, we do have entrepreneurs, we do have academics, we do have medics, and they need to be profiled. Now, since they're not being profiled in the mainstream, we are going to have to play a part in profiling that. I think in the church, you get what you celebrate, right? So if I celebrate the soul winners, I'll get more soul winners. If I celebrate the praise and worshipers, and you know, then more people want to praise and worship. So we actively celebrate, you know, people that are getting their degrees, people that are, you know, going on to fulfill their professional dreams, and people that failed in the school system but were able to translate their skill set into an offering and actually begin to build a business. So we like to profile Black success and Black excellence, and I think the more that we see that, we now have some options, and the mainstream is not doing it. I think that's funded. I think that's deliberate. I think that's part of what systemic racism looks like, is defining an entire race of people, you know, in this sort of limited way. And I think that's a very important part of the recovery. Why? Because right on this line here, there are two millennials. One is a theologian, the other is a psychologist, has built a business. Well, I want to know about that. And I want our people to know about that, because that's part of the economic recovery. It's your belief system, ultimately. If you don't believe you can, then you're not going to find the energy to even attempt, right? But the more I meet, and it's back to the narrative of raising children in the Black space is important for their psychological development, because they now believe that my color is not a barrier to entry when it comes to leadership, because I've grown up seeing people like me in leadership. Well, we have to grow up seeing people like us in business. We have to grow up and since the system is not going to show our Black excellence, then we're going to have to show that ourselves.
So the church has to do that. So another question that came in, I guess this kind of connects with, which is that it's the church as the Black space. Because if you're going to talk about the Black space in the UK, you have to talk about the Black-led, Black majority church. That's the place that's going to have to start being the forerunner, the vanguard, in terms of that economy, exposing people who are exposing the positive people who are in the economy, who are doing well in economy, who are doing well in education. David, would you like to feed into that?
Yeah, I'm going to be very simple. I think if we're going to start recovery, we got to just start to respect and like one another. Just say hello to your Black neighbor. Stop pretending you didn't see them on the road. There's small kindnesses. I think, you know, we can have a big plan, You know, we can have big businesses. We can have, but we won't go to them because the pathology is there. Unless we start to love each other. You know, my understanding of trauma, and Stacey will probably, she'll give a better understanding, is in order to be, they say there are 3 stages from what I've understood. You experience trauma, and then in order, the recovery stage is threefold: that you speak your trauma, that you speak it to someone that hears it, and when they hear it, the acceptance of hearing your trauma gives you the mobility to the next stage, which is to begin to collaborate and co-create a new vision with the person that's heard your trauma. We spend so much time fighting racism and analyzing, and I believe in analyzing whiteness to a degree, analyzing whiteness, analyzing. We just need. Back in the 70s, when the Rasta movement was about, they just used to say yes, roots, and you knew exactly what they were saying. They just used to say Babylon. We knew what they were saying. Now you have to have a lecture about. You say Babylon, they start looking on the map for stuff. I mean, let's get back to basics. Let's get back to loving each other, speaking well of each other. Let's get back to bigging up each other. Why do we have to be jealous of someone's good at that? They're good at that, innit? Let them be good at it. Bless them. These are basic things. All the other infrastructures we try and build on a weak foundation is going to leave the building in tatters. Because when a storm comes, Jesus says, then the whole building is going to come down because the foundation's weak. The foundation of African culture, you read Steve Biko, you read all these guys, the foundation of African culture is a recognition of each other's humanity, and we hold each other with that degree of regard and that degree of respect. Now, the one last point is this. There's a tribe in Africa. They say that whenever a person misbehaves in that tribe, they have a single way of dealing with the person. They take the person out into the field or into the forest. They gather around the person. And until they believe that when a person misbehaves or when a person acts outside of character, the person has lost the sense of themselves. So the whole village stops everything they're doing. They meet with that person and they keep reminding that woman or that man of everything that's good about them and everything that's good that they've ever done. And they keep reminding them until they believe that the spirit of goodness repossesses that person and brings them back into alignment with community. Wow. If we're going to start recovering, we can talk about building all sorts of stuff. Until we learn to speak to each other with respect, speak to each other with regard, recognizing that we're dealing with a human being, not a monkey, not a gorilla, not an ape, as we've been trying to condition. They try to condition us. We're dealing with human beings that have got emotions and thoughts. Human beings that have aspirations. Say hello to your black friend. Say goodbye to your black friend. Talk to them as human. Until we can do that basic stuff, we ain't going anywhere when it comes to recovery. It's that simple. Learn to love ourselves first, and out of the love, we will begin to develop all the systems and structures and infrastructure that we need in order to maximize our contribution to our communities, to Africa, to the world.
Dave, does that also connect with the fact that we say, you know, the saying goes, you train people how to treat you? So would you be inferring, or are you suggesting also within that, or does it come within that, the fact that sometimes the trauma or the negativity we see expressed to the black community from those who aren't part of this race, white race usually, is because within the black community there's not enough love towards each other publicly?
Absolutely. And I make it a point of fact. I was involved in a meeting this morning with a millennial, and I made it clear to the people who were in that meeting, who were in his senior manager in his organization. I made it clear, we got his back and you better treat him well. We're only here because he's here. And we've got to stop being threatened by each other. If someone's good at something, let's back them up and let's do some. Jesus says these are the fruits of love. Don't keep a record of wrongs. We need to be like that with each other. If Selena's good at what she does, I'm bigging up Selena. If Stacey's good at what she does, I'm bigging up Stacey. But what we tend to do is we tend to cut each other down, and then we expect to build infrastructures around desolated buildings. Don't make no sense.
No, totally. Bishop, I know we're gonna be finishing off just in a few minutes, but Bishop, I know you've had interaction and conversations with people before concerning the whole issue of the juxtaposition between racial attacks against the black community and yet racial intra-racial problems in terms of killings amongst the black community. How have you explained and addressed that in terms of giving some clarity as to the reasons why each is happening?
Well, I think what we're seeing in the black community is what we're seeing in black impoverished communities. Okay, and again, I think it's very important to not equate the culture of the ghetto, which is a prison culture, with black culture. Okay, yeah. I think biblically, Israel came from Abraham, right? But Israel came through Egypt. Yeah. Now, in Egypt, you had to behave a certain way in order to survive. Yeah. But when you come out of Egypt, you have to identify with your roots, where you've come from, not what you have come through. Yeah. So we have come through ghettos. That doesn't mean we are ghetto, right? And therefore, in any ghetto, for any color, the same set of circumstances prevail. People sell drugs and they kill each other. All right. Whether that's in Brazil, whether that's in Glasgow with the white working class, or in Manchester, or if it's in Europe, various parts of Europe, you have the same thing. It's a prison culture, right? Yeah. So when you are socially and economically imprisoned, you do things to survive. You behave a certain way in order to survive. You're hard, you're tough, you're gangster, you're ready to do this, that, and the other. But rich black people don't kill each other, right? Middle class black people don't kill each other, right? If you live in a nice house, you live in a nice neighborhood, you're not killing each other. So this hasn't have to do with something inherently wrong in our genetics. This black on black doctrine, okay, that's a social economic phenomenon, as far as I'm concerned, that can be measured anywhere in the world. Dealing with it now is improving our economy. Ultimately, every person that's truly in the ghetto wants out
of the ghetto. Absolutely.
Of the ghetto, and as soon as the money and the opportunity comes, I'm out of here. Yeah. Unless you're deriving your sense of power and everything else from your position in that ghetto. But people get out. So when black people get out of that, what do? They go for a nice house, and they go for nice things, and they go for the best. That's more indicative of who we are as a culture. Yeah. So yes. I think the problem is defining black culture as that. Right. Okay. And when you define black culture as that, it gives an excuse for the abuse of police powers, the abuse of state powers and instruments to come against black people, because that's black culture, and it's not black culture. It is a condition that black people are dealing with and navigating. But I've met many a black person that couldn't identify with that way of life.
I want to thank you all panelists. Thank you all friends. Some people call you panelists. I prefer the phrase friends for this conversation tonight. If you've been blessed by this conversation, I want you to, once again, at least 200 emojis, fire emojis, just light the page up, so that the guests can see how blessed you were by this conversation. And I'm going to ask each of you in just a minute to give a closing remark in terms of 2 minutes. I'll give you 2 minutes each, closing remark concerning that topic of recovery and how the church or Christianity plays a role in that. You might want to include that, but it's recovery we really want to aim at here. So far, I mean, just out of this, I've written down many things, just a few of the things. Power, the power and importance of the black space in the black-led church. We talked about promoting successful black people in terms of exposing them to the culture so that they are, I guess, we're de-ghettoized in our assumption that the ghetto equates to black culture. Bishop used the phraseology, which was perfect, in my opinion, with his erudition, the fact that the ghetto may be where we came through, but it's not where we came from. And then we talked about, David was talking about how we need to practice loving each other. And I kind of added a little addendum to that, little annex onto the building of that statement, which is that publicly, loving each other publicly, because you ultimately train people how to treat you. So I want to go around. I'm going to start with Selena, and then we're going to go around and ask you all for your closing statements as we finish off tonight. Go ahead, Selena. Thank you so much for being on tonight.
Thank you for having me. I really want to just affirm what David was saying about loving one another, and also point to Stacey and the question of healing. I'm a great advocate of therapy. I'm a great advocate of loving our brothers, sisters, fathers, mothers, cousins, friends, saying hello to people in the street. I think the beauty of our community is that connection that we sometimes don't get to pay attention to when we're dealing with these questions of race and trauma and justice and violence. I am determined to sing and dance and to get joke in this time and to eat good food and to not spend all of my time talking about whiteness and racism, because that's how I'm staying well. And I think we have to enjoy what it is to be Black, and to some extent to imagine who would you be if racism wasn't a thing, and make sure there's room for that, so that we're not always living in response to racism or inequality or injustice.
Yeah.
Because I don't think God made us with that in mind.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Selena. I'll go to Bishop, and then to Stacey, then to David.
Yeah, so first of all, big thank you to everyone. You've all been great educators today, and I'm coming away with so much. I think that there's a lot of energy in the world. There's a lot of energy towards this issue, towards addressing racism, a lot of goodwill. It would be tragic if we came past this without translating that energy into a strategy.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that everyone makes some decisions about your destiny and about your future, about your identity, and realize that in every crisis there is an opportunity, and at some point we're going to have to focus in sooner rather than later on the opportunity that is before us, as individuals and as a collective, to begin making that progress and righting those wrongs, changing the narrative, the false narrative that has been delivered by our miseducators. We have an opportunity to change that narrative, and let's convert the energy into a strategy.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Bishop. Stacey, please. Thank you.
Yes, thanks for having me, Pastor Mike. I just think it's just important to understand racism in the context of trauma for me personally, and just how trauma can really affect you as an individual, and how it plays out in your thoughts and your behaviors, and how the root of it can be addressed. So I just think, self-awareness and just raising our race consciousness, and how to really take care of ourselves. Yes, it's amazing to be able to love others, but if we don't love ourselves first, we will not have the capacity for that. And then just look at ways that we can engage in collective racial healing, which is just like, leaning on our community as a whole. So yeah, get connecting with other people, love on each other and support each other, just like David was saying.
Thank you so much. I don't know. I think we've lost David. I think his internet was giving him some problems earlier. He's disappeared. I don't know if he's going to come back for his closing remark. It looks like it cut out. Lord have mercy. Well, it is what it is. We heard some great stuff from Dave. And of course, he opened the whole issue of loving one another. And of course, we need to train people how to treat us. That's what I was saying. If we're really going to be taken seriously, that's vital. I hope you've been blessed, everybody, tonight. Listen, everybody, you have to go and see part 1 of this. Yeah. We had a couple of other guests on part 1. Part 1 is over on our YouTube channel. It's Tab London YouTube channel. And they're all called WNLs, Wednesday Night Lives with myself. And so you'll be able to go on to that YouTube channel and watch part 1. It was a long one, but it was so amazingly insightful and revelatory. It was uncomfortable as well at times, to be quite frank, because we were speaking about some really, really frank stuff. So head over after this, if you can, or for tomorrow, to our YouTube channel, Tab London, and you'll be able to catch part 1, which kind of sets us up for what we talked about tonight. David has reappeared. Bless you, David. We thought we lost you there for a moment, brother.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. Sorry about that.
Okay, no problem. We're just doing our closing remarks. So if you just give yours, and then we'll sign out for tonight. God bless.
Yeah, I think a simple one. Jesus says, love your neighbor like you love yourself.
Yeah.
And if we're going to cast the vision for our community, it's going to start with our healing as individuals. So get yourself a therapist, do some deep work, and let's stop hating and start loving.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, David. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to everybody who joined us tonight. Love you guys. Appreciate you eavesdropping in. We had a whole load of questions, and it would have maybe we need to do just one live on nothing but questions. I'm hoping. Here's what I'm hoping. I've got in the pipeline a discussion with the team, my team, about trying to do these in a physical form once all this lockdown thing is really solved and over, and we're out and we're liberated. Okay, there's a liberation. Once we get liberated from our homes, etc., we may need to gather in groups and have a proper question time panel with people who are erudite from our community, who are some of the great thinkers as we've had tonight. But we celebrate everybody. Thank you to our guests, and I hope everybody has an amazing evening. God bless you. Father's Day is coming up on Sunday. Don't forget, you can watch our Tab at Home Sunday services at 10:30 a.m. 10:30 a.m. either via our Facebook or via our YouTube channel, and you will be blessed. But don't forget, Father's Day is on Sunday, this coming Sunday. So have a great time celebrating those of you who celebrate. Or if you're like me and your father has gone on, you'll really be honoring their memory. God bless you guys. Love you all. Thank you all. Have a great evening.
God bless.